my intentions weren't to kick her ass. From what everybody's saying, that's what I said.
Did you say that?
I was very drunk that night. Everybody says that that's what I said.
Okay. Do you deny that you said that?
No, I don't deny it.
Okay. Did you fight with Michelle Bush that night?
Verbally?
Well, did you...
I exchanged...
I guess my question was, did you physically fight with her?
I had no physical contact with Michelle.
Okay. Did you ever, after that, have any physical fight with her?
After that night, I never
Right.
had physical or verbal contact with Michelle Bush again.
Okay. After the party was, were you still angry with Mr. Garris?
Very much.
Okay. When did you and Ig talk again after the Old Seas party?
I think it was 2 days prior, or I'm sorry, 2 days after that.
Okay. And what occurred during that discussion?
I had told him that I was extremely upset with his behavior, that I thought that we had had plans to talk after the party, that there was something that I really needed to talk to him about, and I didn't appreciate being disrespected the way that he did. If he didn't want to be with me, all he had to do was tell me.
Did you at some point discuss your pregnancy?
I did.
When did that occur?
I believe it was that same day.
And what was discussed about the pregnancy?
Almost the very first thing out of Ig's mouth was, we need to take care of this.
Did you discuss an abortion?
Yes, we did.
Did you wish to have an abortion?
No, not at first. I didn't.
What was the nature of the discussion? How would you characterize the discussion without indicating what Mr. Garris said was?
I had kind of always told myself that that would not ever be an option for me.
Did you decide to have an abortion?
Ig talked me into having an abortion.
Object to any hearsay statements by this witness.
It goes to state of mind. It's not for truth of matter certain. I think Mr. Garris has already testified to this as well.
Garris testified about this, so I guess it goes also relative to his testimony.
Where was the abortion performed?
Here in Fort Collins.
At what facility?
At the Planned Parenthood.
I'm sure to speak up so that
I'm
everybody
sorry.
can hear me. After having that abortion, how did you feel about it?
Humiliated. It still haunts
I
me.
object to the relevance of how she felt about the abortion.
It's relevant as to the second pregnancy. Did it cause difficulties in your relationship with Mr. Garris?
I don't think it caused difficulties. It caused difficulties for me. I sought counseling for it. After that, when Ig saw and what it did to me, he agreed that it was something that we shouldn't have done.
Did your affair with Mr. Garris continue after that point?
Yes, it did.
During that time period, did you also learn of suspicions by Heather Garris that you and Mr. Garris were having an affair?
Actually, I did right after the party at Old Chicago's.
And how did you receive this information?
Through IG.
And did you do something in response to what he told you?
Yes, I told him that I would try and make it right for him. I didn't want his marriage to break up. So,
Well, let's back up. We needed to establish you did something. What did he tell you?
he told me that a wife of another officer had come into the credit union and told Heather about what had happened at Old Chicago.
And did he tell you anything, any interaction between himself and his wife, Heather?
He said she was very upset, that she confronted him on it immediately.
Okay. Did you do something? What did you then do in response after Mr. Garris told you that?
I called her.
You called who?
I called Heather at work.
Was this at the same time period in October of 2004?
It was I was still pregnant at that time.
Okay, it was before the abortion?
It was before the abortion.
And you actually spoke with Heather Garris?
I did.
What did you tell her?
Pretty much I told her that Ig and I were just friends. I told her that I knew that Ig loved her and that I would never do anything to stand in the way of that. And I hoped that she didn't believe the rumors that she was hearing.
Is what you were telling her the truth?
I never would do anything to stand in the way of her and Ig.
And did you tell her the truth about your relationship with Mr. Garris?
Most definitely not.
Okay. Is that the only time, or have you talked to Heather Garris on other occasions?
No, I've never spoken with Heather again.
In December of 2004, a few months after this, did Ken Nelson become aware of the affair between you and Ignacio Garraus?
He did.
And how did he discover that?
I had been out with my nieces shopping, and I had gotten off work early that day and just kind of thrown all my work stuff down on the counter. And there was a journal about me and Ig's complete everything. Our entire relationship, it was never meant to be left there intentionally for Ken to read, but he did read it, and he called me and confronted me about it.
Okay. Did you admit to the affair?
I did.
What happened with respect to your relationship with Ken Nelson after that point?
When I got home that day, he said that I needed to make a choice, that I needed to choose between him or Ig. And at that time I told him that I wanted our relationship to work, Ken and I's. And so we stayed together for approximately another month.
Did you at that point cease your relationship with Mr. Garris?
No, I didn't.
Did you lead Ken Nelson to believe that you had discontinued your affair?
Yes, I did.
Did Ken Nelson learn of that deception?
The way he learned about it is because I moved out.
Okay. When did you move out?
I believe it was the end of January.
This would be 2005 at this point?
That's correct.
Where did you move to?
I stayed in Greeley. I found a condo that I could afford.
Yeah. There's been previous testimony that you and Mr. Garris often communicated by cell phone. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
How do you know how Mr. Garris prevented discovery of your name on his cell phone?
Originally, at that time, he had me in his cell phone as Omar. He actually had shown it to me, and we had joked about it. He actually had a friend named Omar, but apparently that guy's name wasn't in his phone, so he used that for me.
Okay. In February or March of 2005, was there an incident that happened while Mr. Garris was in Florida?
Yes, there was.
And essentially what happened?
Pretty much what it comes down to is I just sent him a quick text saying, if you're up later, call me. And I signed it Omar.
Okay. After that, did something happen with your relationship with Ignacio Garraus?
I obviously knew when they were coming back from their Florida trip. I think they had gone to Disney World. And so when I didn't hear anything from him the day that he was scheduled to get back, I drove by his house and I did see that his truck and Heather's car was out front in their driveway, so I knew they were back. So I tried to call and he wouldn't answer and never answered again.
Okay. At this point, were you still separated from Ken Nelson?
Yes, I was.
You were living separately from Ken Nelson?
Yes.
Okay. How long was it before you spoke to Ignacio Garraus again?
It was early June when we actually spoke again.
And beginning, so for, this was end of February, early part of March,
Yes.
till sometime in June?
Yeah, the beginning of June, I believe.
Okay. Now, you stated that when they returned from Florida, you drove by their house.
I did.
Did you do that frequently throughout your relationship with Mr. Garraus?
More so when I was living in the condo, because it was kind of on my way home from taking the kids, picking the kids up from school and taking them to school. It was just kind of a little shortcut that I would take.
And why would you be interested in going by the Garraus house?
To see if Ig was there.
From March until June, all during that time period, were you still separated from Ken Nelson?
Yes.
Had divorce proceedings been instituted?
Yes.
And did those continue during that time period?
They did.
At some point, did you, you said at some point you did talk to Mr. Garraus again?
I did. Through that time, I had tried to contact him to find out what had happened. I knew obviously something had happened. Finally, I don't know what made him answer his phone. After several voicemails, he had changed his cell phone. I had left him a couple voicemails at work on his work phone. And then one day, he just answered. And we started talking again, and he gave me his new cell phone number.
Did you reinstitute your relationship, your intimate relationship with Mr. Garraus?
I didn't know what was going to happen. The day all this happened, I had, with two other friends, taken a large group of kids to the zoo, including my own kids. And he called me a couple times when we were at the zoo. So I knew that we at least had our friendship back. I had my friend. But then that night, after I had taken the kids over to Ken's house, he had texted me and said that he wanted to talk.
Did you see him at some point in response to that?
Pretty much my text was, okay, do you want me to call you? And he texted back something like, no, come pick me up.
Did you often exchange text messages with Mr. Garris throughout your relationship?
All of the time.
Okay. Would it be common to text back and forth frequently during the day?
All the time.
Okay. Throughout your relationship, then, there were many, many text messages?
I couldn't even tell you how many.
Okay. Did you somehow make arrangements to meet to talk?
Which time?
This, after going to the zoo, did you meet with Mr. Garris?
Yes, he had told me to come pick him up in a text message.
And where were your children at that point?
My children were with Ken that night.
Okay. How did you and Mr. Garris get together?
He would sneak out of his house, and I would pick him up. And that night, I brought him back to my condo.
Okay. In the same fashion, you picked him up near his house and drove him to your house?
Right. He had a couple different ways of getting out of his house, and then he would walk to the corner where I was parked and get in my car.
Okay. What happened that evening?
We started drinking, and it didn't take too long. We reaffirmed our sexual relationship.
Okay. And what occurred after that as a result of that?
That was the night that I got pregnant with Christian.
Okay. And this is still June of 2005 that we're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. When did you discover that you were pregnant?
Not for a month.
Okay. So would that have been?
It was early July. Actually, I remember it was the 4th of July when I found out, because that was the night that I had told Ken about it.
Okay. What happened then when you found out you were pregnant?
My recollection, I think Ken said that we were face to face, but I actually called him crying and told him that I was pregnant and that Ig wanted me to have another abortion. And I wouldn't do it. And I just wanted him to know. I didn't expect anything of Ken. But I wanted to give him a heads up, because it was a little embarrassing.
Yeah. What was Ken's response?
Ken actually was glad that I wouldn't have an abortion. And he said that we would get back together and try our marriage again, and that instead of 2 kids, we would just have 3.
Did you get back together with Ken Nelson?
We did.
Was it soon after that or a while after that? Or?
Ken and I actually got back together that night.
Okay. Did you maintain, however, your affair with Mr. Garraus?
I did.
When did you move to the residence that's been talked about on 19th Street?
We actually had moved from the condo into another house before the one that we moved into. So we had 2 large moves in between the condo there and then where we were living at the time that all this happened. When we moved, I believe it was May of '06, Christian had just been born.
Okay. Well, let's back up.
Maybe late April.
Let's back up a little bit. When you and Ken reunited, what happened to the divorce proceedings?
We went in, he called his attorney and had him rescind the divorce, and we just had to go in and sign some papers.
Okay. At some point during your relationship with Mr. Garris, did you have a tattoo placed on your ankle?
I did.
And does that refer to Mr. Garris?
It does.
And what is the word that is tattooed on your ankle?
It says Iñaki.
Okay. And what did you understand that to mean?
He had told me that it was Basque for Ignacio.
Okay. Why did you do that? Why did you have that tattoo put on?
I have several tattoos. With my first husband, I had a tribal tattoo put on my back. It's just kind of my belief of tattoos is that's the kind of way that I show my life story. So I had that put on my back for my first husband. Ken and I had matching tattoos. Mine was of a flower, his was of a symbol on his arm, and then both of them said KSDJ for Ken, Shawna, Dylan, and Jordan. And then after this abortion happened, to me it kind of was symbolizing a time in my life. So I put that on my ankle.
Okay. Did you mislead Ken about the nature of that tattoo?
Yes, I did.
Did you continue to see Mr. Garris after you became pregnant but before Christian's birth?
Yes, I did.
In November of 2005, did you have occasion to meet Mr. Garris outside of Greeley?
Yes.
And where did you go?
We went up to Keystone.
And what was happening at Keystone that caused this meeting to take place?
We had talked about doing something outside of town together, and I knew that Michelle and I had used a condo of her friends up there several times to be alone. And so I asked Michelle if maybe all of us could do something as a couple, meaning Michelle and Tim, and then me and Ig. And she called her friend, and he confirmed that we could use it. So I told Ig about it, and at that time there was some kind of a victims advocate conference or something up there, and he asked to go to it and was approved.
Okay. At some other time in late 2005, did you arrange to meet Mr. Garris outside of Greeley?
I did.
And where did that occur?
Ig had found out that his father was getting a divorce, and he had agreed to fly to Florida and help his dad move out of this house and get it sold. So he asked me if I would come up and stay a night with him in a hotel room, I believe it was Embassy Suites, near the airport the night before he flew out.
When was Christian born?
Christian was born in March of '06.
And at that time, what was your position regarding Mr. Garris's contact with Christian?
I felt pretty strongly about the fact that if he wanted to have contact with Christian, that he should be able to. I was adopted, and I always felt like no birth parent should be separated from their child, and that was how I felt about it.
Did you discuss that position with Ken?
For the most part.
Did you, at the time of Christian's birth, did you do anything to begin that process?
We had agreed from the beginning that Ig would pay for medical expenses, and that Ken and I would actually physically raise Christian, and that Ken would be known as Christian's father, but that Ig would always have a significant part of Christian's life, just being a family friend.
Did you let Mr. Garris see Christian?
Anytime he wanted.
Did you just do it when he wanted to, or did you talk to him about that?
I would offer all the time.
Okay. Did you offer at the time of Christian's birth?
I did. I called him. Ken had left the room for something, and I did call Ig, and I told him that Christian had been born. And he did ask if he could come see the baby. And so I actually was upfront with Ken, and I told him that Ig wanted to come see the baby. And so Ken respectfully left the hospital so Ig could come.